Hey everybody, Derek from Mac Gaming here. Today I bring a bunch of games that were tested with crossover, which is Windows emulation, on the M2 Mac. First up, we have The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. As you guys can see, the game's running at a resolution of 1920 by 1080p. It's using around 40 to 50% of the CPU, but it's the GPU that's interesting. You guys can see it's totally maxed out at about 100%. It's also using, like, the whole system is using about 30 watts, which is totally maxing out the M2 chip, and that translates into a very warm system. You guys can see right now that it's running at around 90 degrees Celsius with the fans already at 39,000 RPM. They will eventually go all the way up to 7,200, which will keep the CPU anywhere between, well, the SoC anywhere between 80 to 90 degrees Celsius. Now, when looking at performance, we're seeing that it's not able to hold up a smooth 60 frames per second, really depending on what's going on screen. We were just fighting here a few enemies. The frame rate dropped all the way down to 40. Before, in his room, the frame rate was stable 60, but there wasn't really much going on. When you're really loading scenery or moving around, like for instance right now on the horse, fairly quickly, you guys will see that the frame rate's going to jump up and down. It'll hit lows of 20, and somewhere it will go all the way up to 60. Now, the game is using around 6.3, 6.4 gigabytes of RAM, and as you guys can see as well, there are certain stutters here, a few hiccups here and there, and that's probably due to the system not being able to perform as the game is demanding. Now, also, the resolution is 1080p. We could probably drop it to 720p. Maybe we would profit from that. I don't know. I really wanted to set the bar at 1080p, see how the M2 performs at that resolution. And as you guys can see, this is The Witcher 3.
God provided. And they help.
Next up, we have Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, this game is the Steam version, the original Rockstar Launcher version, which is running right now through Heroic. And the thing is that I'm getting this really weird stuttering. I'm not sure why. I tried the DX VK updates. I tried it all. It took me a few hours to get this running. However, when there isn't stuttering, you guys can see that the frame rate does go all the way up to around 90 to 100 frames per second. Regarding performance, well, we're seeing here that the GPU, once again, is going all the way up to around 80 to 95%, which, is also translating into a warm system. You guys can see here, it's at around 80 degrees Celsius with the fan spinning at around 4,500 RPMs. Just as before, we can see that the system's almost using around 30 watts of power. And when looking at RAM, well, you guys can see that it's using almost 5.5 gigabytes of RAM. As you guys can see right now, we are getting a few stutters every here and then, and I really haven't been able to find out why this is happening. I know other people have tested this game with no issues. Even on the M1 MacBook Air, it didn't have these issues. I'm not sure if it has to do with crossover. I was using the latest version of crossover, the latest versions of the DXVK drivers for Vulkan, and everything was supposed to run right, everything was supposed to be okay, but this is what we're getting. This is what I'm seeing on the M2 Mac, and when you're playing the game, it runs just the same with that really horrible stuttering, and I really don't know how to get around it. So guys, this is a GTA 5. Another game I like to try is Grand Theft Auto 4. This was a very demanding game back in the day, and it still is nowadays, actually. You guys can see the game's running at a resolution of 1920 by 1080p, just like the previous games. And just as before, we're seeing here that the GPU is going up to around 70-80%, which once again is translating into an extremely hot SoC. You guys can see that it's at around 92-93 degrees. This will eventually ramp up the fans to around 7200 RPMs. And in return, what do we get? Well, we're getting a game that's barely running at 30 frames per second. It gets somewhat worse once the whole system is heated up. It does throttle, and I believe that not even the fan can't keep it cool enough to, let's say, prevent or avoid thermal throttling. But just as I said earlier, if you drop the resolution maybe to 720p, you could profit from a more, let's say, fluid gameplay. At least in this case, as I said earlier, I want to set the bar at 1080p, see if we can get at least 1080p gaming. But I must also remind you that this is Windows emulation. All this is going through Crossover or Heroic, and of course there are multiple layers of translation going on and emulation, so it's not native performance, and as expected, things aren't going to run nice and smooth. So Grand Theft Auto 4 here, once again with the Rockstar launcher, which is a little bit of a pain when setting up. But yeah, this is it. Grand Theft Auto 4 on the M2 MacBook Pro. Next, I bring up Frostpunk. Now, this was one of the last games I tested with the Heroic launcher for crossover on the M1 MacBook Air. You guys can check that video out on my channel. And this game really pushed the M1 MacBook Air when I tried it. I tried it at 720p, everything at low. And, well, obviously, it would make the system throttle. It would go all the way up to 90 degrees. And in this case, since in theory we're profiting from active cooling, we're kind of seeing the same results. We're seeing that the system does heat up a lot. The fans do go up, and the system is almost using 30 watts of power. Now, what do we get in return? Well, in return, we get anywhere between, let's say, 40 to 50 frames per second, and that is with the actual your city is empty. There's nothing built. Once you actually get like 4 or 5 hours into the game, and your whole civilization here, your whole city is, let's say, further developed than it is now, the frame rate should drop even more since there are more things to load on screen. Just as before, this is a GPU-bound game, and as you guys can see, the GPU is maxed out at a 100%. So things will only go downhill from here once we actually advance in the game. Guys, this is Frostpunk on the M2 MacBook Pro. Here's another game I never get to run at a decent performance on the MacBooks. This is Call of Duty Black Ops. This game was released back on Xbox 360, PlayStation 3. And as you guys can see here, once again, well, it's running at 1080p, everything's set at low, and it's a disaster in my opinion. Once we get out the door here and the combat starts, you'll see that the frame rates are going to drop like crazy. There's going to be tons of stuttering, and also temperatures are going to go up like crazy. Fans are just going to blast. Right now it's at like 90 some degrees, and in return we're getting a really poor frame rate. Right now it's running at 40-50 frames per second. But as you guys are going to see in a minute here, once we walk out of this bar in Cuba, it's just going to go crazy. The frame rate's going to drop a lot, and you're going to get lots of stuttering. So the game's like unplayable. But like just as I said earlier, this is Windows emulation, and it uses many more resources than a native ARM game would. So this is expected, but it's always nice to see if, even given the same conditions, the systems perform better than previous. In this case, I would say that this is performing practically the same as the M1 MacBook Air did. Maybe it holds up a little better at this resolution, since we do have active cooling. And when I did all the testings for the MacBook Air, the resolution was set at 720p, since it was nearly impossible to get anything to run which wasn't native at 1080p. So guys, this is Call of Duty Black Ops on the M2 MacBook Pro.
Go, keep moving. Tango down. Behind us.
Esta es su última advertencia.
This way, into the alley. Get to the car.
Retiran. Reinforcements.
Shit, too many of them. Hold it, cover our six.
Tienen armas militares. Contact down.
I will see you at the airstrip. Suerte, my friends.
Hit it, go! Get the fuck out of our way!
Necesitamos ayuda.
Roadblock! See it. Floor it, Mason!
Sigamos el fuego.
There's a compound. Carlos and his men should be in the airfield. Any minute. There's a signal. Now! Hook up. This is it. We ain't got time to waste.
Nice front. Keep it tight.
La pista de aterrizaje está bajo ataque.
Perfect. You're all focused on the airfield. Convoy ahead. Do not engage. Sit tight. Let him pass. You're out in the open!
Médico.
Tango, down!
Got him.
Well, here we have another game that I usually test on Parallels. This time, I tried it with Steam through Crossover. This is Train Simulator. And, right off the bat here, resolution is at 1600 by 900. And the game, despite the fact of everything being set at low, which, you know, makes the game look like crap. It's actually playable. You know, we are getting anywhere between 25 to 35 frames per second. It doesn't seem to go below 25. And, you know, also it's using a lot of power, 25 watts. The temperatures go up like crazy. We're seeing 94, 95 degrees. So the fans are obviously going to ramp up. We're going to see that the system would lead to thermal throttling, but in this case it won't, since, you know, we have the active cooling. But all in all, in return, we're getting like really poor performance. I tested this game on the M1 MacBook Air on Parallels, and, you know, we had similar performance, and the resolution was set to 720p. So, you know, all in all, this is an improvement. However, you know, it's still not something I would consider enjoyable. You know, it's a simulator. Usually when you're playing a simulator, you like games to be fluid and nice graphics and everything looking, you know, you want all the bells and whistles. So, you know, despite the fact that the game is running, which is surprising, it's not doing so, at least in an enjoyable manner. So guys, this is Train Sim on Steam for the M2 MacBook Pro. So here we have Half-Life 2. I know this is an extremely old game from the beginning of the year 2000, but I really enjoyed it, and I like to test it, since, you know, it's kind of like a benchmark for me, at least in my personal opinion. Usually back in the day when I were to purchase a new PC or any new PC part, the first thing I would do was to load Half-Life and just, you know, see how well it ran. So here we're seeing the game running at 1920 by 1080p. Everything is maxed out, and VSync is disabled. So in return, you know, what we're getting is an extremely warm system. You guys can see that the fans have already ramped up to around 5,000 RPMs. It's using tons of power, 27, 28 watts of power. The GPU's maxed out at almost a 100%. And, you know, one of the consequences of this is that when there's lots of stuff going on screen, lots of action, shooting, which we will see in a minute, the game stutters. It doesn't, it can't, let's say, hold up with the performance needed to have all of that going on. And all of this is probably avoidable just by locking the frame rate, just by enabling VSync to 60 frames per second, and the rest should be a piece of cake. Like, you know, right now it's dedicating so many resources just trying to achieve the highest frame rate, and if you cap it at 60, usually the remaining resources can be utilized to, let's say, do everything else that right now cannot do, and is causing stuttering and the lag when there's lots of stuff going on screen. So guys, this is Half-Life 2 on the M2 MacBook Pro. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things I used to do once I purchased a new graphics card or added more RAM or even just upgraded my CPU was running this test. This test was a benchmark that they came out back in the day for Counter-Strike Source. However, Half-Life 2, Source, Counter-Strike Source, Day of Defeat Source, they all ran on the same engine. And, this was kind of like a benchmark back in the day for all types of systems. And, they kind of try to recreate lots of different scenarios that you would find throughout the game. And in this case, it's not doing that bad. Once again, 1920 by 1080p, everything is maxed out. You guys can see we're getting the same performance that we did with the game, which is obvious since it's the same engine running. In the end, the frame rate, the average frame rate is at around 111 FPS. So yeah, same conclusion as before. Dropping it to 60, VSync enable shouldn't be a problem. Following up with the Source engine, we're testing out Counter-Strike Source. And as you guys can see here on screen, we're getting the exact same results as we did with the benchmark and Half-Life 2 itself, since, it's the same engine, same settings, and all in all, same results. And last, we have Age of Empires 2 HD Edition. This is the Steam version, running through Crossover. Once again, here, all the games have been tested on Crossover. And the thing is that this game is running at an approximate resolution of 1920 by 1080p. You really can't set the resolution in the game, but the results are kind of mixed. We're seeing that the game's not using that much CPU or GPU, and in return, we're getting a really weird frame rate. It's moving between 30 to 45 frames per second. It is using lots of power though, 15 watts for a game like this, but that's probably due to the emulation and translation going on in the background. Now, I tested this game before on Parallels with the M1 MacBook Air, and that did a much better job at running the game. So yeah, this is Age of Empires 2 on the M2 MacBook Pro. Guys, thank you for watching this video. I hope this has been helpful for all of you. Stay tuned for more content. After testing native games and games on Crossover, I'm going to start with emulation. So guys, stay tuned as usual for more videos.